Hello, Carrots here. Welcome to Getting Ready for Oscar. Anybody who's been watching Oscar's childhood videos will know that Oscar has had a terrible catastrophe happen, and he's now lost both of his parents while he was away at school. He has no idea where his brothers or sisters are, or even if they're still alive, because the entire town of Erewhon has been subjected to a bombardment of many meteors all around the world, and lots of Sims have perished. At this point, Oscar has no clue what's to become of him or who will take care of him. He's much too small to take care of himself. One thing is for certain, at this particular moment, all he can think about is the loss of his parents and that he'll never see them again. He hasn't thought yet about what will become of him or how he will survive. His entire world has been shattered, and nobody knows if more meteors will strike, when they might strike, if they'll strike, what they'll hit, who'll be damaged, how much of Erewhon is going to be left over. Oscar is desolate and alone. All he can think of is he will never see his mother or his father again. Oscar's only hope is to come from Sims who live far away in other worlds. Sims, at this point, he has no idea that they even exist. And this video is about the beginning of the rescue attempt for Oscar. Some setting up is required first, and we first go to Dark Harbour, where Animation, my travelling sim, is playing foosball at the bowling alley. Now, this bowling alley is a lot that I built for another video series, Carolyn and Friends. And in episode 12, we find Carolyn and Wilma at this bowling alley. It's in Isla Paradiso, so if you want to see more of it, that's where to go, because you won't see much of it in this video. Now, Anna has to go to Moonfall Island as the first stop on her way. This is my big game now, and it is the game where most of my future videos are going to be played in. So you're going to get to know most of these Sims. They're all my Sims, the townies. Obviously, homeless Sims get added by the game, but I've taken days to get my own Sims into this world. And they are Sims I've made over the years since The Sims 3 was released. Some of them date back as far as June 2009. The Sims you're seeing now are all Sims I've added to the game. Dark Harbour I got as an unpopulated world. It's on the exchange and it's made by Reflong 7. Now, Anna is a Sim I made a few years ago, and she's a witch. I've hardly played with her. She has been in a couple of games before, but at the moment I'm just using her as a Sim that travels between worlds when I need to go from one world to another. And she mostly will be living in the base camps, because I'm gradually adding base camps to most of my worlds. I've got object hiding turned on at the moment to save memory, so you won't actually see too much inside the buildings. Most of the buildings that are in this world are buildings that I've added myself. So here we are at the base camp in Moonfall Island. So we'll have a quick little look around the island so you can get an idea. You're going to see quite a lot of this island because several of my important Sims live here, but probably not much in the early chapters of Oscar's childhood. Perhaps when Oscar ages up to be a young adult, you might see more of it then, before he actually finds a home in Hidden Springs, which is where he's aiming to be ending up. Takes a while for a lot of this to render, and it hasn't actually rendered fully in a lot of places, but you're getting a look around. Again, I've placed most of the lots. I've got them from all sorts of places. These houses came with one of the expansion packs. Some I've built myself, some came with the base game. I've amended things as I've needed to. We won't spend a lot of time here in Moonfall Island. I'll actually be dropping Anna off, and I won't use her again for a while. She'll be staying at the base camp until some future game when I find myself back in this world. The main reason for being here now is to have a look at the boarding school and also to pick up Dan Steele. Now, I've posted about Dan a few times in the forums. Dan is a sim who was born to Patience and Christopher Steele way back in 2009 or 10. And I found the game that he was in on an old backup disc. And I've included him. He's married with 6 children. And I've included him in this game now. And he's going to be one of my townie sims. But since he was already a child of Patience and Christopher, and I have Patience and Christopher in this game, I'm going to take him to Lucky Palms, where he can meet up with this version of Patience, and I'll use the mod Master Controller to add a parent, and he will get Patience as his mother. And then I'll take him to Sunlit Tides, where Christopher's currently living, and do the same there to add Christopher as his father. The house built into the hill on the right, the one with the fence across the bottom of it, that is where the Steele family live, and I'll be going in there to collect Dan. And on the left, one with the big rose window, that's where Crimson lives. She lives on her own with a couple of pets, and we won't actually do anything with her in this particular video, but that's where she is. For anyone who doesn't know Crimson, here she is having a little sleep, and she had some friends over. These friends all live in different worlds. You'll see them from time to time as we wander around the different worlds. They're fairies and genies. They're hybrids, actually, with pretty skins. Not only are they colourful, but they're a powerful little lot. Now, let's go back to Dan's place. As you can see, it's well set up for children. My main reason for building this house was it's on a slope, and I wanted to have a go at building it. It needed to be this tall because the hill was such a steep slope. You have to have at least one wall that's higher than the slope that it's being built into. It's a little look at Crimson's house. The boarding school, it's just along the beach a bit further. And see, there is a little shack on the beach. They live underground. Again, I usually have them living underground when I have those little entrances. The Sims in that household are Mary Azul, who is the clone of Mia Azul, Sarah Jane, a human sim. Mia Azul is there, as is Sandy Seaworth, and Sandy is the clone of Salty Seaworth. I've spread the mermaids out in different households and in different worlds. And let's keep going along until we find the boarding school. I think it's next. I might be moving some of the children who are currently at the Chocolate Cake Island boarding school to this boarding school. Here it is. And I will just leave them there until some of the Chocolate Cake Island boarders have gone home to make space, because there is almost 30 in that boarding school on Chocolate Cake Island at the moment, and that's way too many for the game to cope with. But they can live happily here and wait for us to be ready for them. Now you've had a very quick look around Moonfall Island, we had better go grab Dan and set out for Lucky Palms. The circuit around the island will end up back at the base camp, which is just around the corner. There it is. But before we get down, let's have a quick look from above. They're obviously all asleep at the moment. It's not a huge world, it's a medium-sized world. It's available on the exchange by Reflong 7. Since everyone's sleeping, let's have a very quick look inside the base camp. This is the second base camp that I built. It's got cots for toddlers. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same as the other one in other worlds, and I'm adding base camps to most of the worlds now, and I've got 2 of them I've built. So it'll either be one of these 2 or a house that I put the Sims into. Surprise, surprise, there's a big spin forward, and here is Dan on the right in Lucky Palms chatting with his mother, Patience. Patience is an elder, and she lives on her own. She's had 15 children. Dan will make it number 16. And while he's here in Lucky Palms, getting to know his mother, I'll also get him to meet some of his half-brothers and half-sisters that are also living in Lucky Palms. He does have one full brother, Craig, and once he's met Craig, he'll go straight back home. But Craig lives in another world, Isle of Sims 3. They seem to be getting along quite nicely. Now, because of his age, I'm assuming that Patience must have had a fling with Christopher while she was married to Marty, because she's only been married once, and the reason that she had the 15 children in the beginning was to try to get the badge for having 15 children. And because once she'd had 5 children, the house filled up, considering they had a babysitter as well. So I moved her out to another house with another man, and that was why she had so many different men with having the babies with so many different men. But I think there was 4 in the end. It didn't work. You have to keep them in the same house to get the badge. So eventually I used a male sim to do it, and he had, I think it was 3 or 4 female sims who had the babies for him, and he stayed living in the same house all the way through. The babies never moved in with him. Just having a quick look around Lucky Palms. Obviously I've got to turn rain off here as well. Anyway, Dan is turning out to be in the middle of the first group of 5 children, as far as age is concerned. Now here's a couple of important houses. The one on the right with the digger in front of it, that belongs to Mark Hanson. His son Mike is at the boarding school, and I couldn't find this house to return Mike home. He will soon be returned home from Chocolate Cake Island. And the one across the street from it, up on the hill, that's where Hayley lives, and that is where Dan is about to go visiting, because Hayley is his half-sister, and Mark, who lives across the street, is Hayley's other half-brother. Dan and Mark are not related, because Dan and Hayley share a mother, and Mark and Hayley share a father. Mark is quite a bit younger than Hayley because his father didn't get married again until well after he divorced Patience because of her infidelity when she ran off to live with Gobias and had 5 more children with Gobias. So Dan has just arrived at Hayley's place. He's gone up those steps. There's quite a lot of steps. I actually copied this house from Legacy Island 3 and then originally built it in Twin Towns. So it's been through a few worlds, but I had to add a hill for it because there was no hill on this allotment when I put the house there, but it needs a hill. The sim that's greeted Dan at this point is Hayley's imaginary friend turned real, Pat. Now, Pat's an adult. It looks like she's never going to find a husband or anything like that. She just stays and is a nursemaid for Hayley's children, because Hayley's got a habit of going off and finding new men and marrying them or not marrying them and having lots of babies with them. She's got quite a few toddlers at the boarding school at Chocolate Cake Island, and I discovered there's a bunch of babies and toddlers upstairs in this house sleeping in cots. There's at least 1 baby and a few toddlers. She's had children with Bob Coffey, first one, who was the imaginary friend turned real, and her first husband. He was the imaginary friend turned real of Percy Coffey, who is Hayley's half-brother, one of the children that Patience had with Gobias. And then she left Bob and their son Harry to run off with Gobias, and she lived with Gobias for quite a long time. This was all done autonomously without me having anything to do with it, so I decided she's always wanted older men. Even when she was just aged up to young adult, she kept hooking up with elders, so I decided I would just let her stay with whoever the game hooked her up with instead of whoever I chose for her, and that worked. And she had a few children with Gobias. So that means both Hayley and her mother had children with Gobias, although Gobias never married either of them. Now, Gobias eventually died of old age. Hayley stayed with him all the way through until he died of old age, and then she had a baby with her very quick fling boyfriend, Shark Racket. And that baby he's a toddler now. And at about the same time as she was having a toddler with, or having a baby with Shark Racket, she met a new sim that I'd put into the world that I'd made for another game, and I had abandoned the game. And he's a lot younger than Hayley. Actually, Shark Racket was a lot younger than Hayley as well. And she married Julius, and now she's had some babies with Julius, and I see she's had another one with Shark, which I wasn't expecting to find. But anyway, it's there. Don't know how many babies and toddlers she's got, but she's got a few. Her eldest is a teen, and the rest are all babies and toddlers. I think he needs to go home. He's getting too friendly with Pat. And I have checked, Hayley has got 7 toddlers, 1 baby and 1 teen. Time to go to Sunlit Tides to meet up with Christopher. And that's Mark's house across the street from Hayley's place. We'll see Mike in the boarding school, and we'll bring him home here, but not until after Oscar's met him. I want Oscar to make as many friends as possible. Dan's certainly meeting some interesting new family members. He set off from Hayley's house to travel to Sunlit Tides, where he will arrive and stay with Hayley's sister, Heather. Now, although Heather was born before Hayley, she has had the advantage of a younger gen elixir, so she is not as old as she ought to be. She should be almost an elder. She's got one teenage son, Perry, who's almost a young adult, who is a child she had with her imaginary friend when she was very young. And now she's got another toddler she's holding at the moment, young David, who was born as a result of her marriage to Duncan. And there's another toddler in the cot behind her there. That one is a clone that Duncan made of Jolene Montague from Les Sims, France. Now, Christopher is living with Heather. Christopher moved to Sunlit Tides when Heather and Duncan got married. They were invited, quite a few of the family members were invited by Heather to attend her wedding with Duncan. And they all showed up. At this point, Christopher and Patience were living together in Legacy Island 3. But obviously Christopher wasn't particularly happy with Patience. When they all went home, Christopher hung around, and he became a homeless sim in Sunlit Tides. And I didn't want to lose him because he was an important part of the family. He has a son with Patience called Craig, and is a werewolf. So I went looking for him and eventually managed to get him to visit Heather's house and added him to the household. So that's why he's living with Heather and why Patience is living on her own. Again, that's something the game did, and I just went with it. Thought it was an interesting little twist. I had actually been wondering how to separate Patience and Christopher because I think nothing was happening there, and Patience was often found running around town after work looking for men. I had run into her a few times when I wasn't playing her. She worked in the culinary career before she retired. That's Heather's teenage son Perry sitting at the computer. There is a couple of Simbots around that Heather's made. She's made that one that's standing in the kitchen. And yes, that is a mummy holding young David. They made the mummy by putting some canopic jars into a sarcophagus they reconstructed from some of the bits that they found during their world adventures. They did complete quite a lot of the tombs together, Heather and Duncan. Now he's met his father and had him added to his family tree. It's getting time for Dan to go back home. But first of all, he's going to return to the base camp where he's going to collect quite a few Sims to take with him. If you were watching Louise's childhood in Riverview, you would have met up with Sally. I put a version of Sally into Riverview living near Louise's home. Well, that was Sally. This is her house in Sunlit Tides. The version of Sally in Riverview I'm going to have to rename to a different name. Sally's had quite a lot of children, and most of them are living with their respective fathers, and we're going to meet some of those children now. The chap that she just went inside with is the father of one of her children. That's Daniel Pleasant, and he lives in Sunlit Tides, so I'll leave him here in Sunlit Tides, but the others are going to move on because this world has got too many Sims in it, and I need to remove a few. Sally's one of my very old Sims. She was made initially back in June 2009, and I've got several versions of her in this big game now, so she's going to end up with a few sisters. She has a refreshing attitude. She doesn't mind having babies if the men in her life make her pregnant. She doesn't mind, so long as they take the child off her hands as soon as it's born. It's up to the father to raise Sally's babies. Back at the base camp, Dan has whipped his guitar out and he's got an audience. It's one of the Parrot sisters. And here's sunrise at Sunlit Tides the next morning. He's going to have to leave for Isle of Sims 3 shortly. That's where he's going to go to meet up with his only full brother, Craig. However, I think he's going to have to go a detour because we need to put these children and their fathers in a new world. Sunlit Tides is so full, I can't actually play the game here anymore at the moment. And the world I have chosen is called Grey Meadow Islands. I think it's by Quail Hogs, and that's where we'll be going next. But first of all, we've got to get all those children, although it's toddlers they are, and their fathers, into the base camp. Next morning, before he left for Grey Meadows Island, he went back to have one last conversation with his half-sister, her husband, and his father, who were all living in this house in Sunlit Tides. Their dog always chases the postman, and he chases him all the way up the street. It can be quite amusing or a bit boring after a while. Just thought you might like to see it. And that was Dan going off in that red car. He's now headed back to base camp. And here's the toddlers at home in Grey Meadow Island. 3 of them are Sally's, and 1 is there with his mother. The 2 on the left are twins, so there's only 2 fathers of the 3 of Sally's children that are there. This is the only household that I've got in this particular world at this point. So I'll have to come back here and I'll gradually move more Sims in as the game progresses. I discovered this world has got a lot of townhouses in it, and most of the rooms in those houses are unavailable. I bulldozed one and quickly built a house for them which will hold 3 young adults and 4 toddlers easily without much else. I can return at some stage later and move them around and fix them up so they've got a proper house, and maybe even put the original house back on that lot. And then Dan rushed off to Isle of Sims 3, where he is going to meet some more of his newfound family members, including his only full brother, Craig, who is a werewolf. I've put all of the Sims that I'm planning to put into this world already, and a lot of them are related to Patience. If Dan wants to spend some time here at some stage, he can meet a lot of his relations quite easily and quickly. Let's just get a quick bird's eye view of this medium-sized world. It's got beaches and hidden islands, all sorts of fun and games. I'm sure Oscar will have lots of fun when he visits this world eventually, but he'll probably be at least a teen before he comes here. Just keep your eye out for any children you might see running around, because they're potentially going to end up at the boarding school with Oscar, and he will get to know them then, or when he visits the world that they live in at some stage later on. Craig is being elusive. I haven't yet worked out where he actually lives, but we have found Henry Hansen's home. Now, Henry is the brother of Hayley and Heather. Now, he's already met Hayley and Heather. They were the ones that he visited in Lucky Palms and then in Sunlit Tides. So this is Henry with the long blonde hair. I haven't played him much. He's mostly got along on his own. The game married him at a very young age when they were all living in Dragon Valley, and the whole game was in only one world. And his wife is a Dragon Valley townie, and they've got 2 sons. They were married for quite a long time before I grabbed them and told them to start having children. Boys have both been to boarding school a few times, but I haven't done much with Henry or Siobhan, his wife. You'll see her at the very end when she's talking to Dan in the park. Now, at this point, Dan got called off to work. So I investigated and I discovered that he is level 10 in the science career, so he didn't need to stay at work. He's already a mad scientist, can't go up any further. I suppose he could get demoted. But anyway, there he is, heading off to work in his science career. That rabbit hole is a combination rabbit hole. And as I sat here and watched, various Sims wandered in, and they all turned out to be, well, not all, but most of them turned out to be related to him. This one walking in now carrying the baby, that is his half-sister, Gabby. She's a daughter of Tobias and Patience. So I left him at work for a little while, and then I told him to quit work because I needed him to go on to the next world. Here comes Gabby again with the baby. She is at the top of the magician career. I must play her at some point and put her on video performing. Should be fun. And now we've finally tracked down Craig, still in his mad scientist outfit, but this is his first meeting with his one and only full sibling. They're brothers. Their parents are Patience and Christopher Steele. But when Craig was born, his Christopher was already a werewolf, but Craig inherited it. So Craig was born a werewolf, And when Dan was born, it was a long time, years before Supernatural was released, so he's an ordinary human sim. Since Dan's got so many children, I'm suspecting that Oscar may actually go and visit Dan's house at some point in the future. I'd like to get Craig married with children as well, because I'm trying to get the Patience's children to have as many grandchildren for her as possible, because I want to mix up and end up with a whole group of worlds where everybody is related in some way or other. And I think I've just about got enough Sims in it to do that now. So they're getting on quite well together. That red car in the background there parked, that looks like that is Dan's car. He had that in his pocket already. He must have had it from when he was living in Riverview, I think. It was before I found him and put him in this game new. So he likes, I think his default activity is playing the guitar. But I'm going to get him to go home now. I know he's going to the park first. I thought we might just check out a bit of town. And here's the park. And I'll show you this because a few of the Sims that you're going to get to know. That was Harry Ware, I think, that just walked past then. He was living at the boarding school in Chocolate Cake Island until recently. That's Plum. The Plum bot belongs to one of the households. I think it's a Coffee household that it belongs to. Gary Coffee lives here, which is another half-brother of Dan, but I'm not going to have time for him to track down Gary. Gary is Gabby's brother. Patience had 5 children with Tobias and 5 children with Marty. That shadow that just approached then actually wasn't. It was that Plum bot that came back, as I discovered. I thought it was a pet walking along with a thought bubble and the pet being invisible, but it wasn't. It was a white plum bot floating along, which is now standing beside Dan watching him fish. It was a bit spooky. I'm pretty sure that's Gary Coffey's Plum bot Pearl. That is Siobhan. She is the one who is married to Henry Hansen. Earlier on you just saw Dan at their house and he was talking to Henry. Henry is on with the long blonde hair, who's the brother of Hayley and Heather. And Helena and Hannah, who you haven't met yet. But you will meet them eventually. That is that black dog. That's one of the few Sims I've downloaded and put into my game. It's the black dog that was made by Sim Guru Copeland, who was doing a lot of wonderful work in the Sims 3 store before they stopped adding new objects to it. So there he is. He's in his car. It hasn't rendered properly. It's all grey there. He's heading home, and here, this is where he's come to jump onto his aeroplane ride back home to Moonfall Island. There he goes. And he arrived back at the base camp and the computer's broken. So I'll get him to fix that. And there was a cat there. The only resident was a stray cat when he arrived. So he can fix the computer and then I will merge him back in with his own home, his own household. He must be treating this as a vacation at this point. So I will also get onto that computer and use NRAS to make him treat this as not a vacation. And here he is. I've merged him back in with his own family. And he's doing his default, play the guitar. I won't show you through the house at the moment because you will see it all eventually, and this has been a really long video, much longer than I expected it to be. We've hardly touched on the actual preparation of the boarding school, so I'll make another video now which does that, and we'll move Oscar into it. Because obviously Oscar's got to go somewhere. He can't stay at home with all of those meteors crashing down around him and 2 dead parents. He's an orphan now and nobody knows what's happened with the rest of his family. And of course they don't know what's happened to him either. So that's it. That's their house. So that's where Dan lives. Bye bye for now. Happy simming and thank you for watching. And I'll see you in the next video.